He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Last week, we heard from Angela Cook-Jackson talking about her research as a communication scientist into sexual health with Black and Indigenous groups in the US. She's in New Zealand this year on a Fulbright scholarship to conduct workshops and research with CARE. That's the Centre for Culture-Centred Approach to Research and Evaluation at Massey University. Professor Mohan Dutta leads the programs there. Welcome to Here Now. My name's Kadambari Raghukumar. With all the recent job and funding cuts and restructures in New Zealand as far as health and social programs go, times are challenging for programs like those that Professor Dutta runs. How do you see this work taking shape in this kind of a current social and political climate in New Zealand?
Great question. One of the beautiful things about CARE is, the culture-centered approach the method that we work with is about building community strength and community resilience in creating solutions. What that essentially means is that communities don't need permission from the state or a political party or a political configuration to do the work. The power resides in communities. So, on one hand, I really acknowledge the implications and the serious implications for social science work in a funding climate where clearly there are organized attacks around questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or using the language of woke culture to actually defund these funding mechanisms. So I acknowledge that. At the same time, one of the most beautiful and powerful things about community is that we have been carrying out that work and that has been ongoing, and none of that has stopped. So we will continue to talk about and empirically document the inequities and the impact of those inequities in this environment. And it's even more so important in this environment.
Mohan lives and works in Palmerston North, and a lot of the community research work through CARE happens in the suburb of Highbury. It's a place that historically has often been in the news for crime and gang tensions.
If you think about the broader kinds of narratives that we see in mainstream discourse are deficit-based narratives, particularly in terms of Highbury being a space of poverty, being a space of low achievement, sort of low interest in education, and then the narrative of crime and gangs. These are the dominant narratives. So in fact, the culture-centered approach sort of turns that on its head, because it says that those communities that are placed at the margins, they are placed at the margins precisely because of communication and how communication constructs communities as being in deficit. So one of the earliest pieces of work that emerged from the community as we started forming this advisory ROPU, which is this advisory group that is made up of community members who themselves come from intersectional marginalized identities. And, they came together and started talking about, okay, so what are we going to do to try to build our health and grow it? They said the first thing we need to do is change the narrative around Highbury. So they created this campaign called the I Choose Highbury campaign, with this notion that there are community members that make intentional choices about Highbury being the place where you live intergenerationally, and redefining that space in terms of what are the good things that are going on in Highbury.
And there are plenty of them. From massive community kai gardens to children's programs to migrant support groups. One of CARE's researchers is Venessa Pokaia, and she's across all of this.
I've lived in the community of Highbury for my whānau here for 5 generations now. I live and work here alongside my mother. My mother still works here, my children and their children. I grew up in Palmerston North and I whakapapa, so I'm a descendant of Ngāti Kaupata, which is just on the outskirts of Fielding, or what my ancestors have always called Kawakawa ki te tonga, So that is the Māori name for the area. But, over time, it became known as Fielding. So my father actually grew up out at our pa that's situated out at, Kawakawa ki te Tonga.
With roots that run that deep in the region, Venessa sees this place through a very different lens. She works with migrants and tangata whenua living in Highbury with communication interventions. And they can look like hui, workshops and community gatherings that are open to all members of society, sometimes some with gang affiliations.
It's stripping all that away and looking at the individual as an individual, and not as a gang member, because as we know, there's a whakapapa to being a gang member as well. And for a lot of whānau that I've worked with, it's actually stemmed from abuse while in state care. So that's another issue there. But definitely there's been a lot of violence within our community, but there's also a lot of aroha and manaki and kotahitanga in our community. And that's so some years ago, there was a campaign that Kia put together and alongside the community of Highbury, and it was hashtag I Choose Highbury. So it was highlighting the good stuff that's going on and the beauty within our community. So which is often overshadowed by violence, and when people are focused on that, they miss out on the beauty that's also in this community. And there's a lot of generational whānau who, like my own family, have lived here for generations.
So it's community-driven cultural solutions to some problems that are deeply rooted in social attitudes. Solutions that could look like growing food with different cultural groups, discussing food sovereignty, talking about how children can be kept safe in the community. And at the heart of all of that is one key principle.
Inclusion, like with the migrant community, like with the gangs, those on the edge of society who often aren't included. The rainbow community actually highlighted that there wasn't anywhere in Palmerston North that they felt safe meeting. So it's creating those safe spaces for everybody to feel that sense of belonging and safety and inclusion, where they can have a voice and their voice is respected and listened to.
Venessa Pokaia of Highbury about her work with care as a researcher in her community. Highbury is also in some way actually where it all began for Professor Mohan Dutta.
When we moved to Aotearoa, we moved from Singapore, Kadambari, so we moved to Palmy, and then I was interested in the work in Highbury and sort of a context I was interested in. So my partner and I, we made the intentional decision of living in Highbury and renting in Highbury, and that was one of the most beautiful and transformative things because, I remember when we came here for the job interview and then to search for homes, colleagues drew up a map and said that, the area you should avoid in red, one colleague circled was that Highbury Takaro area, So that intentionality in some ways, I think, has been a critical point in terms of my own journey, because what it was like to live in that space for, the first part of our life was to actually see the love, the connection, and in a place like Palmy, which is so very different from the textures, if you will, of Singapore. And personally, in that sense, I would say that a big part of that experience has been just being impacted by the love, the aroha, the open-endedness of conversations, and I haven't seen the kind of solidarity one experiences in Aotearoa in other parts of the world that I have lived in.
A big thanks to Venessa Pokaia and Professor Dutta for chatting with me. I am Kadambari Raghukumar, your host and producer of the Here Now podcast. Every week I bring you stories from all around New Zealand featuring people from all around the world. You can catch Here Now on all your favourite podcast platforms, as well as the RNZ website. Today's episode was mixed by Daniel Hurley, And I'm Kadambari Raghukumar. Thanks for listening.